Well, welcome to our next episode of what I wish I had learned in my temple prep class. Today, we're going to talk about temple clothing, specifically the garments, as well as the other things we wear in the temple. Most people have some kind of an idea about this, and there's a lot of people want to make controversy about garments or temple clothing and stuff, and you can have your personal preference for it, but most of the stuff that's out there is pretty unfounded. I believe in, you can have an opinion, but it doesn't mean your opinion's right. Basically, when it comes to looking at temple garments and the clothing we wear in the temple. So let's start off with understanding clothing worn in the temple. These are known as the robes of the holy priesthood, is usually the terminology that we use for that. When you go to the temple, it is preferred that you dress in what we would call Sunday best. So clothes you'd wear to go to church, suits, dresses, white shirts, ties, things like that is what you wear when you go to the temple. They usually don't recommend you wear street clothes in. Although I don't know if you'd be turned away if you did, honestly, especially if you have a valid temple recommend. But you should take the time to dress good. Dress not necessarily like dress to the nines or something, but dress your best. So Sunday best is usually acceptable. It doesn't mean you have to do like formal wear or anything like that, but just dress good, like you'd go to church, so that you are in a better state of mind as you are preparing to go to, enter the temple. You go to the temple, you will change into what you could call a base layer of clothing. So it's all white when you go to the temple, especially as you go through like endowments and other things. You'll dress in this. So actually, it's all of them. You'll dress in this base layer. So for men, it's usually white shirt, white tie, a long sleeve white shirt, in fact. So it has to have a collar and long sleeves. You put a white tie on, you'll have white pants, white socks, white shoes. Basically, you'll be dressed all in white. For women, it's a white dress and white stockings or socks and white shoes as well. And this is kind of a base layer that you'll have. For everything, basically, you'll start with these clothes. And it's really nice because here's the thing that's so amazing about it is it doesn't matter if you are wealthy, if you're poor, you're the stake president, you're just a brand new member, it doesn't matter where you come from, okay? We all wear the same type of clothing when you go to the temple. And so this helps to promote the equality of being in the temple. Somebody made a comment once. They went down to the Bountiful Temple one day to go through for some endowment ceremonies. And they happened to, when they walked into the chapel, so there's a place inside the temple. We should probably talk about different rooms in the temple, actually. That'd probably be good for another video. They went into the chapel to sit down to wait until enough people were there that they could then go do an endowment ceremony. And President Nelson happened to be there. They got to sit next to President Nelson. He and his wife were in the Bountiful Temple doing some endowments. So, but he was dressed the same way they were. He was equal, even though he was the prophet. He's equal. So sometimes that'll happen. You'll meet apostles, you'll meet other people, people like Mitt Romney, Steve Young, or other people that are very famous or popular members of the church. They're going to wear the same clothing as you in the temple. So if you would have no idea if you sat next to somebody like, say, John Huntsman Jr., for instance. John Huntsman Jr. is a member of the church. He's a multi-billionaire, or was. He's passed away years ago. Really nice guy. But if you went to the temple, you wouldn't know you're sitting next to a multi-billionaire because he looks the same as everybody else. So that base layer of white helps us think about purity, helps us think in a more spiritual perspective, and allows more equality among us. So again, it kind of takes away the worldly distinctions and just says we're all here. We're all spirit children of God. We're all here equally. We are equal people with God. So that's a nice thing to think about, is how that works out. And it's fun when you go to the temple again. You'll see people. They're all different worldly distinctions or church callings or whatever, but we're all dressed the same when we go to the temple, which is really neat. So that's the base layer. When you go into the endowment, you will you have a packet with you. It's just a little piece of cloth, little pocket basically, that has other clothing in it. Those clothes are what's known as the robes of the holy priesthood. When you go through an endowment ceremony, you will take that with you. And then at different parts of the ceremony, you will be asked to put on some of those different robes. Now, you can look up online and see some of the images and things about this packet, what it looks like. It's nothing fancy. But I want to point out here, okay, that the idea of having sacred clothing that you only wear or use at certain times in a religious ceremony is a very common thing in religion. Now, if you are evangelical, there isn't a whole lot of sacred clothing. There isn't much. That's kind of a different idea to think about that. If Protestantism, evangelicalism doesn't have a lot of sacred clothing. Catholicism does, because the priests are wearing their special vestments when they are administering things. Most Orthodox churches are the same, basically. They do that in a lot of other ceremonies that you have from other religions. You put things on. There's the prayer shawl that Jews wear when they're praying. There's lots of other things that happen, okay, where there's sacred clothing. The yarmulke for Jewish people, sacred clothing, not an uncommon thing, okay? So just realize that. It's even in the Old Testament, we see that the idea of, in the temple, that the priests would come to the temple, they would change their clothes out of what we would call street clothes, and then they would put on the robes of the holy priesthood, and which are usually white robes and a sash around their waist and an apron in front of them as well, and then they would administer in the ordinances in the temple, in these dressed in the priesthood robes for the temple, basically. So the Old Testament talks about it and demonstrates that as well. So it's not an uncommon thing to have. One thing that's important that I want to point out with this, because this goes along with the book of Isaiah, which is an important book to read if you want to understand the endowment ceremonies better, is the type of clothing. When you are fully clothed in what we would call the robes of the holy priesthood, you are dressed in a way that not only looks similar to what the priests would wear in the temple and in the ancient world, but you're also dressed in clothing that is very indicative of marriage in the ancient world as well. They would dress in a similar way when getting married. Men and women would dress in these ways. And so there's a symbolism, not just of priesthood authority that you are given through going through the temple, but marriage metaphor that goes with those garments of the holy priesthood as well. Again, you can go watch all our videos on Isaiah. We kind of get into that metaphor a little bit more over there that you can check out. Now, let's talk about the garments too, because that's the other thing that people wonder about. So garments of the holy priesthood, great, they're wonderful. You wear them in the temple and then you take them off when you're done going through the ordinances and things. And before you leave, you change back into your street clothes. So you take off the garments of the holy priesthood, put them back in the packet, and then you also take off the base layer as well, the white clothing. That's your other temple clothes, and then you put on your street clothes, and then you leave the temple. The garment is the clothing that you wear all day long, so in the temple and outside the temple. When you first go through the temple, we talked about this in the initiatory ordinance video. That is when you are authorized to wear them. So when you go to do your initiatories, you will go in, and when you change into your white base layer clothes to go through the initiatories, you will put the garments on, and then when you go through, they will authorize them for you, and then you'll just wear them like underwear for the pretty much the rest of your life, basically. This concept, again, is not a different concept, okay? This is not something that is just weird or strange or unique only to Latter-day Saints. We have to understand most people that are complaining about garments are coming from a modern Christian ideology. So evangelicalism, Protestantism, they don't have this concept of having sacred clothing that you wear all the time. Jews have sacred clothing. They have the yarmulke that they wear when they're praying and doing other things. Sometimes they wear it at their church ceremonies or other things. They wear it quite often. The Sikhism, they have the turbans that they wear that's part of their religious clothing. There's other vestments and clothing that they can wear for ceremonies and other things as well. Islam has it. Lots of other religions have this idea of clothing to help remind you, or things to do to help you in remembering Christ, or remembering God and your relationship with Him, those kinds of things. Your commitments and covenants with God, all those types of ideas are used to think about clothing. Okay, we can look at Islam has for women the burqas and other things. We can look at there's so many different opportunities out there. So we need to understand that it is common to have. So for the LDS church, they have what are called temple garments. These garments are worn underneath your clothing, preferably. Sometimes there are exceptions made to wear clothing underneath the garments. Women, this is a very common exception sometimes for women to have other underwear to wear at certain times of your life underneath the garments. There's a personal preference how you do that, but that's usually where most of those exceptions come in. So you should wear it all day, every day, basically. It's kind of just another layer of underwear, basically. It is very symbolic. Okay, it's very important to have, just like when you go through the temple questions, we talk about that in that video of the temple garment and some of the things about it, how it is a representation of the veil at the temple, which is a representation of Jesus Christ, your covenants with Him. It's a reminder of what you've promised to do in your covenants. So it is an outward expression of an inner commitment to Christ to wear those. So those are things you want to take into account when you're wearing those garments. Now, in the so just realize it's not uncommon to have these garments there. Now, sometimes people complain about the garments because the garments have symbols sewn into them. And again, there's a lot of anti-Mormon groups that talk about this and try to expose it as crazy. A lot of people will see this as a commonality between Masonic rites, Masonry, and LDS temples, because two of the symbols are a compass and a square. Now, a compass, if you're not familiar, a compass is one of those tools that basically has a point on one end, and you can stick a pencil on the other end to draw circles, or to measure things out, and to help you in creating geometric shapes. It's a symbol. Okay, it's a symbol of dealing with exactness and honor and honesty and integrity, those kinds of things. The other one is the square. So the square is designed, it's usually a piece of metal that is designed to help you find 90 degrees, make sure things are square. So these are tools of the trade for a carpenter or a tradesperson would use these tools to figure out, is it square? Is it correct? Do we have it done properly? So everything's going to line up properly as we build whatever we're building, some kind of a construction opportunities. They're just symbols, okay? Even in the Masonry, they're just symbols of this idea of exactness and honor and integrity and honesty, and following a path versus everything else, and that's okay. So the idea of compass and square in religious rites is not a modern thing either. The scriptures are full of ideas of using Some of these tools, in fact, we hear also about the plumb bob that's used, the heavy weight that hang from a string to help get verticalness. There's, there tools, instruments of this nature have been used symbolically for a long time. In fact, even in ancient China, in their creation myth stories, they have the two gods that created everything, basically in ancient Chinese myth, are one's holding a compass, the other's holding a square. And this is a tradition that is thousands and thousands of years old. So this goes back a very long time to using these ideas of, let's use these concepts of tools. This tool helps you to be accurate. The goal is to help you be spiritually accurate in following what God wants you to do. So it's not an uncommon thing. Okay, so they're not weird or crazy or foreign or anything like that. They're pretty common to have. So like it says, you have to understand that the temple is a culmination of modern ideas and ancient ideas. It comes together. The temple has more to do with Old Testament than it does New Testament, basically, but it still doesn't incorporate teachings of both. But if you look at it, it's usually more Old Testament. It's more liturgical. That's why it's different than than church. Church is seen as more evangelical, more focusing on feeling the Spirit, whereas the temple is more ordinance-based, doing the ordinances, going through those things as well, while feeling the Spirit and everything else. So there's nothing weird or strange about them. It's all about making covenants and reminding ourselves of the covenants we're making, and utilizing these things to guide us and to help us in thinking through what are we doing to build that better relationship with Christ. That's all it really comes down to. So that's what it means, basically. Now, if you have any questions about specifics or other things in there, feel free to put it in the comment section. I'll do my best to answer those. But hopefully this helps clear up some ideas around what is worn in the temple, as well as what are about the temple garments and things. It's nothing crazy or weird or odd, but it is very symbolic in what it can do to help us in our lives. It's a blessing to wear the garments. It's a blessing to have those on. Some people will equate them to the idea of the armor of God, if you will. So it's there to help us, to give us protection, spiritual protection, to help guide us in our thinking to stay focused more on Christ. So that's basically what they are, the garments and the holy priesthood clothing as well. So hopefully that helps clarify a lot of things for you, and helps you to have a better experience. As you go to the temple, you can think about, these are my commitments, these are the things that I'm doing, the covenants I'm making, and God is going to bless me because of that. I am thinking about my relationship with God, and how can I build that better? How can I have a close relationship with Jesus Christ? And the clothing can help us to, again, symbolize those thoughts and ideas to get us focused and thinking in that direction. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.